Okay, well, let's get started. It's 5 o'clock here in sunny Berkshire. We've been having a very windy day. This morning I had my dog with me when I did this morning's episode, and this afternoon it's just me. And today I'm talking about the lessons we've learned at Articulate from an astonishing 100 webinars over the last 6 years. Most of them were done by me. Obviously, I had a whole team supporting me with content, with the HubSpot work, with the automation, and so on. But let's just get rid of that. But it constitutes a fairly large body of knowledge, and I want to talk a little bit about what we've learned from doing all of that. So, why are webinars so important? Because they work. I mean, they work for marketing. They engage people. This graph is showing the number of people who've registered for webinars, or the number of registrations since we started doing them in the summer of 2020. And you can see it sort of averaged around 50, slowly climbing, and it's averaging now between 150 and 200 a month. That's engagement for a company our size, for our kind of audience. There was a lull between mid 2024 and 2025, and the interesting point here is, even when we didn't run webinars for a year, they still engaged because people were signing up for and watching pre-recorded webinars that we had done previously. But there's a clear correlation between doing webinars and having people attend them. The more you do, the more you promote them, the more engagement you get. They're also an opportunity, I think, far more than you would get from a written report or a blog post or something slightly more impersonal, to get an experience of working with Articulate. I mean, you get to meet me, I run the company, it's got my stamp on it, but also through our work, you get to see, through our webinars, you get to see the kinds of things that Articulate does. So I might be talking about a report that we've written, but one of my colleagues might have written it. And so that, I think, is trust building, and we'll see how important that is in later slides. It also generates pipeline, and this is the value to Articulate of all of those webinars. More than half happened in the last year. Okay, so this is over 6 years, but half of it happened in the last year. Probably in the order of 5,000 contacts in our CRM have engaged in some way with webinar content. So that's astonishing right there, and not to mention all the blog posts and social media and repurposed content that have come out of the webinars, and that has contributed to just under £1.5 million worth of pipeline. And we're a small boutique, beautifully formed agency, and that's not an insignificant amount of money. So they work. They also support this sort of engagement and trust that is necessary if you're selling expertise, and other kinds of things, but certainly for Articulate. And interestingly, out of the thousands of people who've signed up for a webinar at some point or other, more than 500 have signed up for more than one. So those, oh, bless you, thank you for doing that. But there's some sort of sense of loyalty. There are some super fans in there who've signed up for dozens. Not many of those, but they're especially welcome and valuable. When you break down the people who have signed up for webinars, and the numbers are, this is a different time series, it's really just to show the shape of it, and people have maybe signed up for more than one, but it shows that a pool of people who've signed up for webinars are disproportionately sales qualified leads, or former or current opportunities, or marketing qualified leads, or clients or opportunities. Now this picture changes sort of based on what happens to them as they go through the sales funnel. So it's also an indication of outcome and fate as much as anything else. They might have been leads when they started, but they ended up being sales qualified or opportunities or whatever. So, and this is not the shape of the total distribution in our database. Certainly not the distribution of people who've engaged with people who register for webinars, sorry, it's a long day, where people who register for webinars are disproportionately well qualified leads. And they're well qualified not only because they are further down or end up further down the marketing and sales funnel, but also because they are persona qualified. This is, again, a different time series than the total. This is the last 12 months. But, so they are marketing leaders, they're business leaders. There's a lot here, although not the majority, 172, who we don't know what their persona is, most likely because when they registered they used a webmail address and we couldn't do some classification and enrichment on them to discover. They may well be, CEOs of big companies, who knows, we just can't figure that out. And the same is true when we look at the sectors that they are in. And again, we're doing a lot of work to enrich and classify our contacts generally and specifically for webinar attendees. Again, no value, probably because we can't work back from the email address or some other clues and indications back to who they are, who they work for. But when we do know who they work for, which is the majority of cases, they're in target sectors for us, which is really nice. Okay, so let's come to, that's helpful. I'm doing a new thing here, by the way, which is using Notion as a presenting tool. I'll talk about why in a minute. That's the first time I've done it, so some of these glitching and zooming in things are, sorry, apologies for that. So what have we learned from this process? From 100 webinars, 6 years of doing it, particularly in the last year when it's been especially effective and valuable. Lesson number 1, what you say matters a lot more than how you say it. Delivering the webinar, having something interesting to say matters a lot more than the production values and the fanciness of the design, and often, in fact, in inverse proportion to that. So we could have spent a lot of money having, green screens and fancy cameras and, multiple views and stuff like that. Again, this comes down to trust, I think. It's, the sale is indicative of the product. Right? It should show what it's like working with the company. When you work with Articulate, you get me and you get my lovely colleagues, and we sit in our homes and our rooms and talk to people over conference calls. And so this is almost exactly what you get when you work with me, right? Why would we want to, put on our fancy pants and get a soft focus lens and have a camera crew and a director telling us how to do it? It just raises the cost, complexity, and ultimately the friction. I'll come on to slides later. So having something to say matters more than how you say it. Second thing, it's very easy, and I've seen this with clients who start with webinar campaigns or the other sort of twin sibling of webinars is podcasts. They do a few and then they stop because it's hard work, because they set high expectations of production values, and they are disappointed with the initial results. So typically the failure modes are nobody signed up, or if they signed up, nobody came. Well, you can learn from that, right? You can tune that, and if your cost of production, your cost of deploying webinars is relatively low, and there is some upfront cost, and I'll talk about the effort in a minute, you just keep plugging away at it until you get it done. And you can promote better, and you can find better fits between what you want to talk about and what your audience wants to hear about. What doesn't seem to work in my experience is talking very closely to the product or service, right? If you are, hey, come to a webinar and we'll tell you about, the exciting reasons why you should buy X, Y, and Z, people tend to stay away from that. They don't want a sales pitch in the form of a webinar. What they want from webinars is something that's relevant, useful, and interesting for them, something that talks to them about their issues in their language as far as possible, but coming from a position of expertise that they can't get from, casual reading, Google search, ChatGPT, right? Something that's unique and interesting. As Google puts it, expertise, experience, authority, trustworthiness. You might get a lot of people signing up for the webinar, second failure mode. Nobody comes. Our experience is probably out of 100 people who sign up for a webinar, you will get between 20 and 40 people turning up on the day. If they've signed up, in some ways, mission accomplished, because you've got them in the CRM, they're aware of you, they know you're doing it, they might have signed up to watch the recorded video later at their convenience. That's perfectly reasonable. Although there's something nice about the communion of actually, I'm talking live, the people watching this live, it's theatre rather than television, you know. I might say something stupid at any moment and you get to enjoy it happening as it happens. But even if nobody turns up, you can improve the process of reminding people, you can engage with them earlier, you can make it clearer what the value is going to be. And even if nobody turns up, you get to record a video, you get to prepare a presentation, you can turn that into social media, you can turn that into written content, you can put that on your blog, you know, repurposing that content. It's an extremely time efficient way of getting expertise into content. And I think the number one challenging problem that all our clients have with expert thought leadership content creation is the knowledge is in people's head, but they haven't got the time or the skills or the interest or motivation to turn that into content. Webinars can do that very, very efficiently. And in one case out of 100 webinars, I had a power cut, and I literally couldn't get on the internet. I couldn't figure it out in time. And by the way, these are 100 webinars, but are probably more like 150 transmissions, because like today, I'll do 2 in one day. I'll do a morning session, and then I'll do an evening session for the American audience. Or indeed people in England, you know, getting to beer o'clock and wanting something to relax, something other than work to do. Okay, things you don't need. I don't think you need producer support. I mean, I was very ably supported for the first 50 or so of these by a former colleague called Maddie Leslie, who it was great. She would be, you know, chatting with me on Slack. She'd be chatting with the attendees, answering their questions on the chat. Should just make sure that the audio is working, things like that. It was fine, but was it a particularly good use of her time? In the end, no. It was probably just more about making sure that I felt comfortable doing it. Once you've done a few of these, just setting it up. We use Riverside now rather than Zoom, but just making sure you've got it set up correctly is fine. I don't think you need live chat. I don't think you need polls and quizzes. I don't think you need like conversations. I mean, it's perfectly reasonable format to have 2 people talking in a webinar, and our client and friend Will Critchlow at SearchPilot does a really good job of interviewing and discussing on camera. That's not my format. You don't need to do that, but you certainly don't need to have this. Chat's a different forum. I don't think you need fancy cameras. I've got 4K cameras, and I've tried it with, you know, using the fancy camera on my iPhone, and you can do all that stuff, but it's just more complexity. I used to have one of those fancy USB microphones. I just broke the stand, so I stopped using it. It was a faff setting all the cameras up. It's okay doing this. It's all right. It's all right. What Riverside does very nicely, though, which Zoom does not do, is it's capturing my video locally. So when we make this into a video, we still get HD video and not compressed real-time transmission video. So that's a way of solving, or partly solving, the quality problem without having to, you know, invest thousands of pounds into. I mean, I've seen people with, you know, big SLRs and things like that for webinars. I don't know. I mean, do it if you want, but I don't think it makes any difference. And the last thing I don't think you need is performance anxiety. And I'll tell you why. People are nervous about doing webinars. For some reason, they think that live performance, it smacks of public speaking, right? I'm not nervous of that, luckily. I'm nervous of spiders and dancing, and 1 or 2 other crazy things, but I don't have that phobia. But the thing is, people now are on video conferences all the time, quite often with larger audiences than we might get for a webinar. And if you're happy sort of chatting to people on a video conference, colleagues, clients, whatever, what's the difference? In fact, probably with a webinar, you're better prepared and you've thought about it more, and you're talking about something you know about. So no need for performance anxiety, no need for apprehension of any kind. Things you do need, I think you need targeted effective promotion. It is no longer the case that you can do a blog or a webinar or something and just people will come because like, oh, that's so interesting. I've never seen a webinar before, right? That boat sailed with COVID. I started my blog 20 years ago, I got 50,000 visits a month after about 3 months of doing it. And I was astonished but now you have to really work hard. Everyone's got a blog, everyone's doing a webinar, everyone's doing a podcast. You do need to get the word out. So we do a lot of work with email targeting and list building and very careful sort of HubSpottery to cultivate and get the message out to people. Social media also potentially a bit of paid. We've got, when we did various experiments with LinkedIn signups for webinars last year, we were getting down to a CPA of something in the order of 20 to 25 pounds per registration, which is pretty good, I think, for LinkedIn advertising to get a lead. We're an inbound agency. We sort of, why spend money on advertising? We've got other ways of doing that, but your mileage may vary. Critical thing, consistency. As you saw with that graph, when we stopped doing it, we got some trail registrations for recorded webinars, but we just didn't get the leads. And the moment we restarted, the needle moved again. Ideally, we would like at Articulate to do one a week. It's hard work for reasons I'll cover in a minute. So one a fortnight is the current goal, and we're going to move back to one a week, subject to various technical experiments. At a minimum, one a month, right? Just keep scheduling them. And what I found works really well is when my team tells me what I'm going to talk about and when, and puts it in my diary, right? You're doing a webinar on this topic on this date. Get ready, because the emails have gone out. So, like Ulysses and the sirens, tie yourself to the mast and then you'll do it. Continuous optimization, largely behind the scenes, but also with process, like different presentation tools and things like that, different webinar tools. We started off with Zoom, briefly tried Teams, ended up with Riverside. We might try something else. Last tip, if you want to start a webinar or boost or juice the webinar, and you put AI into any topic, as long as you've got something useful and interesting to say, and you get a lot more registrations. Obviously, it's a hot topic right now. Talking about AI seems to be very effective. So our biggest webinar, we've done 2 big webinars on AI, and between them they had 1,000 registrations, which is, it's pretty good going, I think. Typically, one webinar might get between 50 and 100 registrations. Individually, it's like the river and the rock. The river doesn't make a lot of progress day by day, but over time, the river beats the rock. Small patient accumulation of registrations and progress and recognition and revisits, that's where the action is. Lesson number 5. We made the decision on day 1 back in 2020 as a HubSpot partner. We're going to do all the sign-ups, registrations, emailing, and nurturing follow-ups in HubSpot. We're going to build the landing pages in HubSpot, all of that stuff. It's commercially relevant and useful for us to do that. We kind of needed to do it to prove that we could. And we were kind of, at that point, it was quite complicated, or there weren't good tools for doing it in Zoom or whatever. That's not the case now. You can outsource all that registration, emailing stuff. I'm still not convinced it's the right thing to do. And the reasons that if I was starting again, I would still do it in HubSpot, despite the work, is 2 things. One, it keeps the experience very much on brand. You don't leave the website, you don't give the data to someone else, you haven't got another GDPR attack surface or legal surface or all this stuff. It's all just in the same platform. In fact, 3 reasons. Second reason, it's very tightly integrated into our prospecting and our sales activities, so that the handover from you sign up from a webinar into our sales team is going to bother you in some way, fairly smooth, not always as smooth or as elegant and as friendly as I would like, but it happens. Whereas if you have the registration somewhere else, you've got to do some integration, and somebody has to, some plumbing still has to happen in HubSpot to make that work. And lastly, we've got some really remarkable data. So I'm going to break with tradition a bit. Normally I do everything in slides, but I just wanted to show you, this is a dashboard that I use to track the progress of our webinar. So this is just webinars since last year, the last 12 months. And I can see, who's signing up. All these details are clickable. I can zoom into them. Interestingly, 82% of webinar registrations are from existing contacts rather than it's their first conversion point, but a reasonable number, it's still their first conversion. So it does quite well at the top of funnel, but it really does well in the middle of the funnel. These charts you've already seen, but I've got really, really terrific data. I mean, geography and blah, 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 blah. So that set of insights and all the automation and the segmentation of things that happen off the back of it is really valuable. And you can kind of do it. We've done a couple of Zoom integrations into HubSpot for clients. You get at it, some of this stuff in a slightly different way, and you have to do some different things in Zoom, but it's easier if it's all in HubSpot. Okay. But it does take work, right? If we do a webinar, and I'll show you the checklist in a minute, you've got to build a landing page, a thank you page, and then another thank you page post, for the pre-recorded. You've got to build some workflows. You've got 5 emails, 2 promotion, 1 registration, 1 reminder, 1 post-event email. So these all have to be created and constructed and sent and tested. After the event, you've got to do blogification. What we like to do blogification, so to take the recording and turn it into a blog article. I don't know if blogification is a word. It is now. And then there's sort of social media before and afterwards that happen. So there's sort of quite a lot of moving parts. There's quite a lot of marketing assets that have to happen inside HubSpot. And the interesting thing is that HubSpottery, as we call it, takes more time or about the same time as the effort required to prepare and deliver the content. And that doesn't seem right. It just seems like a lot of work. Now, I'm lucky because I run a marketing agency. I've got a bunch of people who work with me, colleagues. So I get my marketing wholesale. So it costs clients more. If you're busy, if you're typically in a small marketing team, you've got 10 things to do and 2 people to do it. This overhead is quite expensive, and I can understand why people go and do it with Zoom and things. We've got it all in a box and can deploy it into clients quite quickly, and we can help with this stuff, but there's also automation I'm coming on to. So that's again a peek behind the scenes at the effort estimate. And we've done time and motion studies and things on this. We've looked at it quite carefully to see where the time goes and where the effort is. So we're pretty confident about these numbers. We don't, just as a side, we don't track hours. I've translated this from our internal effort estimate model into a rough hour effort estimate just to make it easier to get. Lesson number 6, quality assurance testing is essential, right? You've got a huge amount of moving parts. It's really surprising when you actually deconstruct a webinar how many things have to come together in the moment to work. You've got 5 emails, you've got 2 workflows, you've got landing page, all this stuff has to have the same dates, the same information, the same links, all those links have to work, etc. The most common mistakes are relatively minor. It's a typo, it's a broken link, it's an email that has to be sent out, it's an email that's sent too late or too early, or it will say things like the webinar's tomorrow when it's the day after tomorrow and that sort of thing. So there's those sorts of, I don't like to say trivial, because if you're trying to say you know how to do marketing and you make a mistake, it's non-trivial. But we live in a gigantic glass house and we throw tiny little rocks just because we produce so much stuff. But still, so we have in the last few months, last 3 or 4 months, my colleague Sean has produced this with other people's input at an SOP, and you can start to see actually how many things have to happen. And a lot of this has to happen if you do it on Zoom. So, create the featured image, make sure it's on brand, yada, 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 create the calendar link in add event, and right. There's a lot of stuff. This checklist is 5,000, or this SOP is 5,800 words, just to give a sort of order of magnitude. Well done, Sean. And it's part of the processification that we're doing for pretty much everything at Articulate. And after many, many years of really wanting to do that properly, with our CFO's help, with Mirella's help, we're now about 84% documented. So there's still 14% of the sort of process, another sort of 15 or 20 that we've got to do. So anyway, SOPs, fantastic. That really helps. I'm going to talk about automation now, and that's the next frontier on this. But let's do slides first, right? I think we'll end on automation. My old history tutor said you can use facts in your essays like a drunk uses a lamppost for support or illumination. And I always thought that was a funny line. It's a little bit the same with slides. People turn up to see me. If they turn up to see the slides, I'm producing a document. I might as well just send out a blog post or a report. So the slides are there partly to keep me on track and help me keep on top of the timing, and partly to remind me what to say, but not to read out what's on the deck. And I have found we've gone through using Paste from WeTransfer, which shut down a few years ago, which was so simple but really, really efficient for creating the slides and really, simple and plain. Then we started using Pitch, which we still use for other things. And today I'm experimenting with using Notion, which is like the most basic slide deck. It's even more, I mean, Notion's amazing and complicated and clever in lots of ways, but as a presentation tool, it's very basic. But it's designed to keep things simple, right? So what I have also learned intuitively, because Guy Kawasaki had the 10-20-30 rule in 2006 or 2007, and I've known that since then, which is 10 slides, 20 minutes, 30-point text. But the slides have gotten more and more complex over the years, and certainly when colleagues have been preparing slides for me and presentations for me on their knowledge and their reports that they've worked on, they tend to approach it like writers, so they tend to put a lot of words on the slides, and I'm trying to shift back from that. My colleague Joanna is going to run a webinar in the next month or so about the psychology of presentations and slides and the design and how that works. But a couple of takeaways from that, her work on that. The first one is, in a slide deck, the first and last page matter a lot. So if your first page is some pious throat clearing and a table of contents and I am Matthew and blah blah blah, you've completely blown the opening right you need to start with, as I tried to with this one. Slides work, here's some data that should be really revealing and interesting. I'll leave you to judge whether the last slide is relevant or not, but it's important for me. And the second thing is, among many things she covers or will cover, taught us last week, the bit of your brain that reads slides is the same bit of the brain that hears the words. So if people are reading your slides and you've got lots of text, they're not listening to you. This has been tested. Apparently it's true. And the last thing, and this is an observation I have, is every minute you spend adjusting the font size and dragging the corners of a box in PowerPoint or in Pitch to make it look not rubbish, is a time you're not thinking of something clever, interesting to say in your presentation. So time spent PowerPointing is, I think, time spent not adding value. So how do you automate? Well, my view is nobody on their deathbed said, I wish I'd spent more time in HubSpot doing emails and landing pages. And our mission is to get the HubSpotification, the HubSpottery and the blogification down to total 3-4 hours for the whole thing, so that we can free up more time to do human stuff, and also get the frequency up, so that we started last year doing monthly, then we went to weekly, and then we dropped back at the moment to once every 2 weeks, and we want to be able to get back, but it's just that sort of 10-15 hours of effort for every webinar is just too much when we're really busy with client work. So we need to make that less of an effort. Right, so that's the mission. Today, or just yesterday, but I've been testing it all day and I've been doing the next stage of this with some colleagues, we started deploying some automation into our Notion databases to do some of the stuff. And this is the thing that everybody who's ever worked on a webinar hates, right? Is, okay, if I do it at 5 o'clock in London and it's the summertime, and then what time is that in New York and what time is that in Pacific? And then are they on daylight time, or, what's the times shifts, and how do we do that? And we built this thing that basically you say we're doing it on this date at this time in the UK, and it then automatically does all the time zone calculations and pops these things in, which get pasted into the emails. And then it uses an API and it goes off and gets the add event links and populates that, so that we never have to think about this again. It's just going to work. Less chance of mistakes, and probably a 15 to 30 minute round trip of manual work saved for every single webinar. So if you multiply that across 40 webinars a year, you're talking about 20 hours, two or three person days of work saved just with that automation, which I'm extremely happy about. And that's just the start. So 1 minute overtime. Thank you for your patience. I will come to my conclusion and my peroration. This is the last slide. Is it impactful? Well, it not visually, but my message to you is webinars work. They build pipeline engagement and trust. We can help. I mean, either by talking about how you can go about it, by reflecting on your webinars and giving you some feedback, or talking about how we can build a webinar campaign for you. If any of that resonates, if you want to talk to me, you can email me, matthew@articulatemarketing.com, or you can book a meeting with me, articulatemarketing.com/meet. That is my calendar. You can just book a time straight into my diary. No fees, no bullshit, no pressure. Just if you want to have a chat, I'd love to talk to you. And that is it for today's webinar. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for joining. And I wish you a very happy afternoon, morning, or evening, depending on wherever you are. Goodbye.